A few weeks ago, I had a few of the darkest days than I've had possibly in years. I was in a lot of pain, which was affecting my sleep, so I was absolutely exhausted. My dad is facing some pretty serious health conditions, and there's a huge amount of uncertainty around that. And then a few other things that were happening that piled up. All my usual personal resources just did not feel accessible to me, and I felt incredibly isolated. The world got very dark. And when the world got very dark, I experienced a very deep, very visceral sense that I was being punished for something. You know, when something just feels true in your body? That was how I felt. And yet, my rational thinking mind would say, well, if you were looking at somebody else who was suffering in pain, struggling, would you look at them and think, well, they're clearly being punished for something they've done? I wouldn't. That doesn't fit in with my worldview. So why is it the case? Why does it feel like it is the case for me? I did some journaling during this time because my head was just a whole scramble and I was trying to figure out what was going on. And when I started journaling, I realized I basically started making a list of all the things that I felt guilty about. I felt guilty about not going to bed earlier. I felt guilty about spending too much time scrolling on my phone. I felt guilty about not doing my physio exercises for my back. I felt guilty about procrastinating over these tasks that I kept promising myself I was going to do. And I think I ended up listing off about 8 things that I was feeling guilty about. And I remember when I looked at that list thinking, no wonder I'm feeling like crap. Like, look at the guilt I'm carrying. If I am so guilty of something, then yes, I do deserve punishment when we're thinking about the scales of justice. But feeling guilty about something and actually being guilty of some kind of crime or wrongdoing are 2 very different things. And we see it over and over again, how kids, when they're born into households that are abusive or neglectful, that they tend to blame themselves. They think it must be something they've done, or that if they can just change themselves, then the situation outside of themselves will improve. And we'll look at that as adults and we'll go, well, of course it's not that kid's fault that they were born into that family. But actually for the kid to believe that it is actually the hopeful position. Because if it's my fault, if I've brought this on myself, maybe I can fix it. If it's nothing to do with me, if I just live in a scary, cruel, unkind world, then I'm really screwed. The idea of that is terrifying because it is a lack of control. So there's 2 main tendencies that people might move into when it feels like life is giving you more than you can handle, or when it feels like all these terrible things are happening that are outside of your control. One position is to blame life. That's to get really mad at life and the world for being an unjust, unfair place. And then the other is to feel like it's something that you have done. The benefit of the first one is that it protects the self. It absolves you of anything. The problem is all out there. The downside is it puts you you are completely a victim of life. If life is only throwing these terrible things at you. Whereas the second position, to blame yourself, is to try to take responsibility and control. So the benefit of that is to go, well, maybe there's something that I can do. The downside of that is there will be many situations where the actual amount of control you have is very limited. Because there are many things that are outside of our control. There are some things that are inside of our control. And I think as human beings, we're notoriously bad at knowing the difference. Depending on which way you swing, you're more likely to think that there are more things inside your control and you're just not taking control, or you believe that none of it is within your control and you're missing the aspects or the places where you could have some influence on your experience of life. There is a concept which I've only heard spoken about this way very recently by Dr. K, and it is the difference between passive versus active challenges. So life is challenging. We all face challenges in life. I think we can agree on that. The passive challenges are the ones that we do not choose for ourselves. Life throws them at us. So my dad being unwell, that is a passive challenge. I would not choose that for myself. An active challenge is the challenge that we choose for ourselves. So me starting a YouTube channel was an active challenge. And we tend to feel the most out of control and the most victimized by life when our passive challenges outweigh our active challenges. By which I mean all the challenges that you have in your life are all ones that you have not chosen for yourself. So therefore you feel like you don't have any control. And so one of the ways to take control is to have more active challenges. And it seems like if you are dealing with a lot of passive challenges, it's like, I don't have the energy, the emotional or the mental energy to take on more challenge. But taking on active challenges is what builds up resilience. It builds up a sense of control in life. So I'll give you a really unhealthy example of this. So a classic backstory of somebody who develops anorexia, this is not everybody, but this is a common one, is that they're going through something in life where they feel so out of control, and food becomes the place where they can take control. So they're having these passive challenges, but the active challenge that they choose for themselves is to restrict your food, because it is a challenge to restrict your food. And of course, we know that leads to a dark road. So what might healthy, active challenges look like? I'm not suggesting you start a YouTube channel or you take on a big project that's going to take a lot of time. It can be much smaller than this. And when I was thinking about this concept, I realized I actually did this myself years ago when I would have long bouts of depression where that alarm would go off in the morning and I did not want to get out of bed and face the day. It was just a feeling of dread every morning. Something that I started doing, and it was just something that occurred in my own mind, was setting my alarm 5 minutes earlier than I had to get out of bed. And the thinking at the time was, if I set my alarm 5 minutes earlier, then I am choosing to start the day, as opposed to the day is starting on me. It didn't transform everything and lift, but it gave me that little bit of a sense of control in the morning. And so another one that I thought of is one that I do, and it's that when I'm having a shower, for the last maybe only a minute, I put it on just cold. So I have a cold blast at the end of my shower, and I never want to do it. However, I do know that it feels good afterwards. But the thing that I say in my mind when I do it is, I can choose discomfort, because I think I always saw myself as someone who just avoided discomfort because she couldn't handle life. But actually, when you avoid discomfort, you don't escape discomfort. It shows up somewhere else, maybe stronger and maybe in more passive challenge. When we choose to be uncomfortable because it makes sense to us to do so, that's what helps to bring in that sense of autonomy in our lives. Rather than life happening to us, I'm deciding to turn that shower onto cold. I don't have to do it. That is a decision that comes from me, because it is a signal to myself I can choose discomfort. Because I think one of the things that I've judged myself for is a lack of consistency, a lack of grit, and it's a signal that I can push myself, because I don't like the cold. The cold makes me feel sad. This might feel strange though. You might think, I have big problems. How is a cold shower or getting up 5 minutes earlier going to help me? Those are mine. I'm not suggesting that you do those unless you actually think, oh yeah, that makes sense to me. I like that idea. But when you are just firefighting passive challenges, you are often not making decisions. You're just in reaction mode. And I think actually the human being is sort of wired to evolve and want to grow. And that's what active challenges do for us. And when you self-blame, when things aren't going well or the way you're handling it isn't the way that you want it to be, does that self-blame actually lead to positive action? I actually think that self-blame is a way of trying to turn a passive challenge into an active one. But it kind of gets stuck, because I don't believe, or certainly from what I see, when I see people blaming themselves, most of the time I look at that situation and I think, I don't see it. I don't think you are to blame. Except when it's me, then of course I am to blame. And that's not uncommon, right? To have a different view for somebody else than when it comes to yourself. The way that you talk to yourself, the way that you think about yourself, you're not thinking everybody else should be thinking about themselves like that, are you? Now, the knowledge of that isn't going to be enough to just stop it in its tracks, but to be able to sit with the dissonance, which on those dark days when I was absolutely in that feeling that I was being punished, there's a part of my mind that's going, this doesn't quite make sense. So I wasn't as fully in it as I would have been 8, 9 and more years ago. It is so uncomfortable to feel something to be true and then to kind of know that it's not, or to think it might not be. Our bodies, our brains, we don't like being in dissonance with ourselves. But in order to change, in order to feel better, embracing the dissonance is a part of that. Because when we are trying to feel better, maybe we want to change the way that we think or the way that we're talking to ourselves, the new that we are trying to develop and hold on to is going to be existing at the same time as the old. And I think this is why people find change so challenging. Because how can opposites be true? That's what it feels like. I feel like I'm being punished, but my brain's telling me that can't be true. That's like an opposite that I cannot resolve in the moment because of how visceral the feeling is. But I can tolerate that conflict much better once I'm aware of it, because I'm sure that often this is going on outside of my awareness too. So until we're aware, but to deliberately embrace the dissonance, I think is necessary to start to get the old stuff a little bit further and further away. The thing is, the old stuff does exist in your neural networks, so it can be activated. But if we can label it as old stuff, then we're not completely identified with it. So I'm imagining, if I'm trying to make sense of why I might feel like I'm being punished, I think, yes, it's a way to try to take control. But also, I grew up in a Christian faith system where I am a sinner. And so, I mean, unless I'm saved, my punishment would be eternal damnation. So that would speak to actually how bad and rotten we supposedly are at our core. And that's just one of the bits of the Christian faith that I just cannot get on board with. So what I want to leave you with is the idea that self-blame is an attempt to take control of something or a situation that chances are a big chunk of it is outside of your control. So in that moment when you are falling into self-blame, if there's a little part of your rational brain that can question, is this about me trying to take control? Because what would it mean if I wasn't to blame? In a situation where you might blame yourself, just play it as a thought experiment. What if I'm actually not to blame here? What does that mean? And the answer might feel a bit scary. Maybe self-blame feels safer. But ultimately, I think when you're stuck in self-blame, your experience of yourself, your relationship with yourself will really, really suffer. And we have two worlds that we live in. We have this outer world that we're all sharing, and we have an inner, private world. So I'm a big believer in making that inner world a much kinder place, because that's where we might be able to have more influence. Out there, there's so much going on, which is not to encourage passivity where we can go out and make a difference, but recognizing there's still a lot of places and things that are happening that we can't. I feel very ineffective when I say that. Not ineffective, that's not quite the right word. Impotent. I feel impotent when I say that. And I feel like now I want to leave it on a cheery note. So maybe I should grab a cat. Cats always make me feel better. Hey, come on in. Come on, kitty cats. Oh, the world just feels a lot better when you've got a cat. Oh. I love you so much. Okay. All right then. My videos and all of this is about just trying to make that inner world a nicer place to reside. Anyway, I hope this was thought-provoking and helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.